Welcome to Stronger at Home. When we go 12 consecutive months without a period, menopause has begun. Women sometimes refer to this as being postmenopausal. In the period leading up to menopause, estrogen levels begin to drop, and menopause-related symptoms may begin. This transition period is called peri-menopause. Peri-menopause and menopause-induced symptoms can vary between women, but can include hot flushes, fatigue, sleep disturbances, and changes to our mood. We also see an increased risk of cardiovascular disease and osteoporosis. Hot flushes, in particular, are a common symptom. Upwards of 75% of women experience these, and some for years. Strength training has been shown to decrease hot flushes by over 40%. It is important to note, however, that lower intensity exercise modalities like walking and yoga have not been shown to decrease hot flushes. Another common worry in perimenopausal and menopausal women is bone loss. Bone loss accelerates in the first 5 to 10 years after menopause, and insufficient loading during this time may further accelerate this loss. The best way to prepare for bone loss in menopause is to achieve a higher peak bone mass prior to menopause, ideally in our adolescent years. Almost 90% of bone mass is achieved by the time we're 18 years old. So optimizing this in adolescence is protective against osteoporosis and its associated morbidities in adulthood. But like me, if you're watching this and you're over the age of 18, there are still things that we can do. First, do encourage the children and adolescents in your life to achieve that high peak bone mass. This will be especially important for girls. Second, bone is a dynamic tissue, and a positive bone response can be generated by loading that exceeds our normal daily physical activity. Therefore, to improve our bone density in perimenopause or menopause, we likely need to lift heavy things. Our bones seem to respond well to dynamic, intermittent loads, rather than static loads, so standing all day probably won't improve our bone health. Loads that are novel and with high impact. High impact is great for our bones. However, we should probably build up a foundation of strength through evidence-based strength training before we move on to high-impact loading with unusual loading patterns. Bones do not seem to require continuous repetitive loading cycles. In fact, that may be counterintuitive, as bone may desensitize to repetitive loading. Therefore, continuous repetitive aerobic activity like walking, running, or cycling does not seem to be an effective form of exercise for bone health in postmenopausal women. The amount of muscle we have is also important. Postmenopausal women with reduced muscle have a higher risk of falls and a higher risk of bone fracture than women with preserved muscle mass. And since muscle is a highly metabolic active tissue, a loss of muscle can be associated with metabolic disorders such as obesity and diabetes. As we can see, we want to begin strength training as early as possible, but it is certainly never too late to start. Strength training increases our muscle, bone, and joint strength and muscle mass at every age. Strength training also spontaneously increases our levels of physical activity, decreases our blood pressure, lowers our resting heart rate, improves our body composition, and many, many more outcomes that are important to perimenopausal and menopausal women. If you are engaged in a progressive strength training program or just about to embark on your strength training journey, try keeping a journal to track your menopause-related symptoms. If you have been consistent with your strength training journey, but have yet to see benefits, remember, in order to build muscle mass as we age, we require higher levels of volume than younger adults. and for bone will require at least moderate to high loads.